Welcome to episode 5 of the Bookweaver's Quill. We're so excited to have you with us today, and I'm
Sure.
going to pass this off to Anna Marie, who's going to explain what we're talking about.
Well, thrilled that everyone's here, and this is episode 5, which is a very good number. And today we're going to talk about how you feel and how you are vulnerable enough to confide in someone. And to confide is a very, very, very special act that we do with friends. And in our writing, each of us has selected a different piece in our own writing. And I was reading them all prior to getting on here. And it's amazing how differently we have each selected something and the different relationships that people have and why they confide in someone.
Mhm.
And I think through this particular podcast, that's something that we would really like to touch upon and would like to invite each of our listeners to think about, why do you confide in someone? I mean, that is a big, big question. Is it fear? Is it that you want to definitely share something that you're afraid to keep to yourself? All types of questions come up. So that's what we're going to do. Steph and Jackie, do you have anything about why you think we were focusing on confiding today?
You want to answer?
No, go ahead.
Well, I think that the idea of confiding just as authors, just to chat about that, is that the writing process is a very intimate one. And when you write something that you're proud of or that you spent a long time creating and you have that excitement about it, you want to share it with people. And I think that choosing who you share it with can
Mhm.
be a very um, it can make or break you sometimes if you choose to share with someone who isn't supportive. If you um, choose to share it with someone who is supportive, then you get this really lovely feedback. And I think that, and sometimes, constructive criticism. And I think that that is something that every author experiences. So, when we talk about that and then we translate that into our writing, I think it's pretty easy for authors to put the idea of confiding into their writing because of
Mhm.
having the experience of doing that outside of their writing. But everybody experiences this idea of confiding and feeling that they can speak to someone or share something for various reasons. So.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Right. Right.
Absolutely. And
Okay.
from the reader's perspective as well, it's quite the same thing. I know that personally, my favorite books almost feel like secrets, like something that I share with this person or this character. It's almost like they've confided this story into me, and sometimes it's like almost like I feel like it's mine. Like that's my story. I get very possessive about
Mhm.
stories sometimes. Yeah, like my favorite ones. Like that
Mhm.
was kind of like an intimate relation between um whatever that author put down on that page and the reader. So.
I definitely connect with that. Definitely, because I know I have certain books that when I read them, they just go right to my heart. And if I mention it to someone and they say, "Oh, could I borrow that to read?" I kind of glaze over. And I say, "Oh, well, you know what? I'd be thrilled to buy you a copy because I don't want to let go of the one I have."
Mhm.
So I totally identify with that. Yeah. Hmm.
And to add
Yeah.
on to that, when you read a book and you feel that feeling, but then
Mm-hmm.
you share with someone else who has also read that book, who also had that feeling, you feel like you have
Mm-hmm.
this secret bond with that person then
Yes.
through the
Yeah.
book. Because, and I actually, a couple of my friends that, we weren't very close before, but now we're really close because of that, because of a book, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So,
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we really hope that we can impart that to the people that are listening, because that's why we've all chosen to share these little excerpts. Certainly, we shared them with one another, the three of us, but being able to put it out into the world to share those intimate feelings and confide in our listeners about what we're trying to do as authors and what we would love to have you reciprocate, any listeners, with us. So confide in us during the week and let us know what you think. All right. So the first reading I have here is from Jackie. And Jackie, you want to set this up for us?
All right, so this is from House of Unwound Thread. And this particular passage is of the main character, once again, who still does not know who she is. It's an amnesiac who is going through um, the motions of trying to discover who she is, but has not learned anything yet and feels in danger. And a really interesting passage that I find a really interesting passage where she's kind of making her first friend. And well, let's read it and then I guess we can talk a little bit more about it later. I don't want to get into spoiler territory.
Okay. Wells let out a charmed laugh, but something like concern flashed in his eyes. What were you doing out there barefoot anyway? My fingers twined into knots. I wanted to say I'd gone shoeless so I wouldn't make any noise. That was, of course, the most obvious answer, but it wasn't true. Not entirely. And something about the way he was looking at me, his eyes so piercingly sharp, told me that he already knew that. A sudden bolt of heat washed over me as I glanced down at the green gingham cloth draped across my knees. The dress, along with everything else I owned, had been part of a donation meant to help me get back on my feet. But none of those things were mine, and even if I couldn't say who I was or how I'd gotten here, one thing I was sure: they didn't feel like me. And yet, day after day, I wriggled into dresses of linen and lace, letting the cloth fall over me like a disguise, as if all those drapes of fabric could somehow cover up the gaping hole inside of me, as if they could make me somebody else, somebody whole. But I was growing sick of being told to walk in somebody else's shoes. It was time for me to stand on my own 2 feet for a change. I can't remember, I finally said, picking up the worn boots and pitching them into the wastebasket. They hit the bottom with a satisfying clunk. I couldn't tell if Wells had managed to piece together the truth from the meager breadcrumbs I'd been willing to offer, or if he was just being nice. But he plopped down and began undoing his own laces, tugging at the rattered edges until his boots were loose enough to slide off. You really remember nothing at all? Not even my name. I felt my lungs deflate as if the air had been squeezed out of them. The words felt even heavier when spoke out loud. Do you know how long it can take? He paused, weighing his words. For your memories to return? I slumped further into the chaise, running my fingers up and down the velvet upholstery. Ever since I'd awoken, I'd been told to wait. Wait for my parents to show up. Wait for my memory to return. And then wait to find out why neither of them had. Nobody had mentioned for how long. I don't know if they'll ever come back. My voice came out weak, severed in two by the arrow of grief slicing through me. It must be horrible not knowing. I shrugged, feigning indifference, but he was painfully close to the truth. Every day I woke up wondering if that would be the day my memory would return, a day I could finally stop digging through shadows of the past and my life could truly begin. Working his laces into an elaborate box knot, Wells slung the boots over his shoulder. Maybe you're right, he admitted, his dark strands brushing over his eyes as he gave a dismissive shake of the head. Maybe some things are better not known. It was very well written, Jackie.
Hmm.
Yeah, it
Thanks.
really is. Yeah. And the vulnerability
Mm.
that your main character has is just, I mean, the way it's written, you really feel like you are in that unknowing with her.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's very well crafted. Yeah, very
Thank
good.
you.
Mhm.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
felt the same way about that. And I like that you picked this passage with Wells because it's really, I like him a lot. So,
Thanks.
Yeah, it's really well done. Yeah. What does it do for you, Jackie? What was it like when you wrote it and things like that?
It was very personal. I think in this particular passage, she wants to confide, but she still doesn't know who she can trust. She knows that things are not quite as she would hope them or would have wanted them to be. And I think she's on guard and she really doesn't know um, if this person is as kind as she would hope.
Jackie, when I read this particular excerpt, and I know that you write for young adults, you know, uh, I thought how apropos that that's one of the things that young adults feel when they move into a new environment or they're meeting new people. Was that something that you were very aware of when you were writing this particular scene?
Yeah, it was definitely I know when I was a child, I moved and it was probably one of the hardest things I ever did. And I mean, I was only 6 years old, but I really felt I was a strange kind of kid, I guess. I thought that my whole life was
mm,
back there and it was
Mhm.
only 20 minutes 20 minutes away. But for
Mhm.
a little kid, 20 minutes and a bridge that opens over a river, like that's
Mhm.
way too far. And I left everything behind. And I remember having those kinds of feelings a lot. It took me, I think I don't know if I ever felt like my second home was actually home.
mm,
It was always
Mhm.
that first one that I left and the people that I left behind. So yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
mm.
I felt that so strongly when I was reading that piece. How young adults could identify with that. Going into a classroom or going into a new friend group, going into a party. Like you're not really sure who you can tell what to.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you
Mhm.
want to. I mean, you can tell in this excerpt that she wants to believe him. She wants to say what she thinks, and she's so hesitant because she's still
Mhm.
so scared.
Mhm.
And what I like in it is how Wells actually is. He does pick up on it. She's not sure if he
Mhm.
does or not, but he definitely reads into what's happening, and he kind of almost in his own way finds a way to confide in her, so to make her feel more comfortable.
Hmm.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, it's an exciting excerpt because it certainly piques our interest to see how she begins to feel more confident in things. So, very well done.
Thank you.
Okay, Steph, are you ready for
Sure.
our reading yours? Do you want to set up your scene?
Sure, yeah. So it in this part of this is the Air of Light and Shadows. I did not say that in the last episode, so but
Oh,
I
dear.
usually use the same book. So in this scene, this is actually one of the beginning scenes where the director of the FBI, who is running this special ops um, mission, I guess you would say, is telling Brody, who's an ex-agent, that the person that he is protecting isn't just, he's not just protecting her from a mafia. He's also protecting her from something that's in her inheritance. It's a pendant that they believe is connected to an ancient fairy bloodline. So it's a very, Brody's a very skeptical person, and and I think it's very difficult for director Nunez to say to this person, you know, this is what's going on.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. Now, there are a couple of complications surrounding Lizzie that I would like to discuss. Your job is not only to act as a protection detail for a woman in need. Harold had much more than an inheritance. In his things was an ancient pendant passed down through his family bloodline that had nothing to do with the money. What's so special about it? Brody opened a bag of peanuts he'd brought from the campus vending machine. He popped one of the peanuts into his mouth. Nuez shifted in her seat and then cleared her throat. I have reason to believe this relic has connections to something, but that something is unlike anything I've ever seen. She paused before saying, it might even teeter on the spectrum of supernatural. Supernatural as in ghosts? That kind of thing? Brody didn't believe in ghosts, and he wasn't about to start because of a tall tale. Nunez grunted. If only. I'm talking about something more powerful, an ancient realm, and that artifact might be a key to opening it. But even I can't tell you what would be behind that door. Now Brody cleared his throat and ran his hands over the stubble on his chin. Had the director lost her damn mind? Let me get this straight. You believe some pendant might open a doorway to a fantasy world with dragons and beasts? It was the first thing he could think of. Why do you even think that? Because Harold told me about the relic before he died, and he said it must be protected at all costs. Up until this point, I've been trusting you blindly, Director, but I'm sure you can see why now I might be a little apprehensive. Maybe Harold was senile. The elevator stopped on the second floor. You said he was old. My father trusted Harold with his life, Nunez defended. Harold might have been old, but the man had his wits about him, and he showed me the scrolls that went with the relic. Not that I understand anything, but
So the one thing I'll say about this is that I appreciated that Nunez is believes Harold, even though there could be many reasons why she wouldn't. For instance, he was in his late 90s. He was older, but he reminds me of my grandfather. Actually, that was the inspiration for him because my
mhm.
grandfather, was 98 and he had his wits about him. I mean, he could tell you anything. Up until the day he died, I mean, he was just the most like together guy that you would ever meet. Um, and so he reminds me of that where, she believes him. And I think that takes a lot for her to believe him and also for what he's telling her. I mean, he's not telling her like I met this guy 30 years ago. He's saying like, there's an ancient pendant in my inheritance and here's what's going on. And then for Brody's skepticism, I think is warranted because he's like, what? What are you talking about? Are you sure? And so I like that dynamic between them because what Brody knows of Nunez, and he says this quite frequently, is she's just a no-nonsense person. She's very direct. She doesn't, you know, steer off the path. And here she is bringing the most unlikely situation to his attention. So,
Mhm. That takes a lot of confidence to confide in somebody something like that,
hmm
something that is supernatural or out of the ordinary.
hmm
You know? And I think that's something a lot of us do, even with experiences that we have,
hmm
trying to tell someone about something that happened to us, and and not necessarily that it's supernatural or but it is very much out of the ordinary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it can be supernatural, and that has happened to me as well. And then
Mhm.
I confide in someone, and they're like, "Are you sure?" I
Well, I
am,
think
you know.
one of the things that you've written very well in between the lines here, Steph, is that we need to be really discretionary with who we share certain things with. You don't confide in just anyone. You have to be
hmm
very discretionary in who you do open up to. And I think you've peppered that beautifully through this particular passage. Yeah, very much so. Because you can tell that Brody does have respect for Nunez, and she is straight up and, talking, saying what she knows to be true, but it's really hard to prove it.
Right. And just, not to give away spoilers, but I think right after that, you see that even though he is skeptical, he follows through with that. He keeps that in the back of his
Mhm.
mind as the story
Right.
progresses. So
Uh,
it's not like he dismisses her and just says, "Oh boy, she's really lost it." He he takes what she says seriously, and good that he does.
Yeah, very much so. Do you think this particular passage, Steph, sets a foundation for the reader to begin to believe?
Mhm.
Sometimes we can read a book and just say, oh, that's preposterous. Do you think the way that you're crafting this particular opening passage, you're setting a foundation?
I do. I do. I think that one of the things about this book is that it is an ease into fantasy, and I like to come at it from that skeptical or skeptic perspective.
Mhm.
So everything that these characters and it does happen frequently in this book is this idea of, oh, what are you saying? Is this really happening? But I like to break down those walls of um, this bridge between this world and the fantasy world. And I do think that this is one of the first scenes that breaks that breaks down the wall a little bit.
Mhm.
And then it progresses as it goes on. So yeah, I do.
And Jackie, I think there's an element of that in your passage also. How do you confide in someone that they will begin to trust
Mhm.
what's happening? Because everything that your main character is going through could be contrived.
hmm
Mhm.
So
hmm
you both did a very good job. I like it.
That's probably why when we were reading each other's books, we were like, "Ooh, I like it."
Yes. I love this scene. I love Nunez. Yeah. I loved how how direct she was, and I love that scene just because of the way that Brody was so hesitant and wanting to believe her, but still having trouble. And I thought I personally have had a lot of trouble writing scenes. I feel like when I write, a lot of times I read it afterwards and I'm like, what Anna Marie just said, like, this is preposterous. That would never happen. It's so bad. Like, nobody would believe this. And when I read that, I was just like, oh my God, it's like so good. Like you don't even second guess. There's like a relic, there's a bloodline, there are fairies coming, and you're just like, uh-huh. And what else? Like you just like ate it up. And I was like, this is incredible. Like I love that scene.
Mhm.
I don't want to share spoilers, but there is one spoiler I'll share in this chapter because he's eating those peanuts and she tells him, all this stuff about the fairy bloodline. But and he's taking it in, right? When she tells him who Lizzie's father is, he chokes on the peanut, which I find funny because the whole time she's telling him about all this other stuff, he doesn't really react. But then when she tells him who her father is, he does. He's like he gets choked up, literally.
Yeah. It was
Okay. All right. Jumping into my little thing here. And this again is an excerpt from the book in progress. Only when she reads. At the end of our fourth grade year, Celine's grandmother moved in to live with the family. Her mom had turned their family room into a bedroom so that Graham had a private place of her own. I don't know how private it is for Graham, Celine whispered as we peeked between the portable room dividers. We'd giggled and jumped to our feet when Graham would open the room divider quickly. I thought I heard voices outside my room, she'd say, smiling. Celine and I spent a lot of time with her Graham that first summer. She taught us how to make chocolate chip pancakes because she felt everyone needed to know how to make a good breakfast. There's an art to not burning the chocolate chips in the pan, she emphasized. Her voice was filled with excitement and pride, intonating that she was passing on a cook's secret. We each hung over our own pan, watching the tiny bubbles popping up through the batter. Each pancake is unique and cooks at its own pace, she'd added, watching the top of your pancakes, and when the tiny bubbles stop appearing, flip it over. Graham, who had once been a teacher's aide for special needs students, also taught us different spelling tricks we could use for the spelling tournaments we entered in school. We'd usually sit on the back steps leading into Celine's tiny row home. Graham would sit on a faded green folding chair at the bottom of the stairs facing us. Because the stairs were so narrow, Celine and I each needed to sit on our own step. I sat on the first step closest to the back door, and Celine sat on the bottom step closest to her Graham. Your mother is dyslexic, Graham had told us as Celine squirmed on the narrow step, trying to get comfortable. I needed to help her learn to read and spell. Graham had gone on to say that there were many famous people who were dyslexic, who had become very successful. Why, Albert Einstein, Leonardo da Vinci, and Thomas Edison were once thought to have a form of dyslexia, she'd continued. I'd always told your mama not to waste her precious time worrying about whether other people thought she was smart. It's more important to believe you can do anything and practice what you're trying to learn, she declared. The brain is a powerful tool, she'd said with a wink, pointing to her forehead. And the power and the magic comes from believing you are unstoppable.
Hmm. Wow.
I love this.
Yeah.
This is exactly like what we were saying earlier about it's confiding with the reader.
Hmm.
That passage touches
Hmm.
so many readers,
Yeah.
just so many different people and their experiences, and it's so visually beautifully done. The part with the little bubbles in the pancake. I mean, like you can smell the pancake.
Mm-hmm.
And the part on the step where, she's trying to get herself comfortable, like
Yeah.
how I grew up once when I was young. I'll go home. I miss Grandma.
It's funny, as an author, I found myself when I was writing this particular passage wanting to put in so many more details. I wanted Graham to go ahead and talk to them about, as you watch the little tiny bubbles, you also have to pay attention to the smell to see if there's any, if you can usually smell if it's starting to burn at the bottom, even though the bubble. And that was one of the challenges that I had with this particular passage. How did I say what I wanted to say, but not say too much, not to put in too much detail?
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so for our listeners who are authors, might be something that you'd want to comment on. Confide in me. Like, because that challenge was there. And in fact, I have two other drafts that have that in there.
Mm.
But sometimes it weighs things down too much. So I chose to take it out. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a very delicate balance, when
Yeah.
you're writing something like how much is too much, but how much is too little.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yep.
Mhm.
I think
So,
that was perfect, though. I think it was such a rich, rich passage, and just how you weaved it from making pancakes into like learning and, taking that and then imparting wisdom to the kids that they're going to carry
mhm,
with them. Just, thinking about, you know, how someone can say something to you and
mhm,
that will stick with you. What Graham says to them is, look at Albert Einstein, look at these three really smart, intelligent beings who may have had this issue and, you know, your mom and this and just, oh, it was really good.
yeah,
Love that.
yeah. Well, like I said, just that one little part about how do you find that delicate balance,
Yeah.
is
And
a
it's
challenge.
also
It
this.
is hard. It is hard.
Mhm,
Yeah.
mhm, yeah.
And you want to add all these things in and then
Well, you do.
you take them out and you have to
Right.
weigh like does this break the scene if I remove it,
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah.
So I also felt that it was really interesting the different way that we portrayed confiding because in Anna Marie's passage, Graham confides in the children something about themselves by using somebody else. So she talks about the mom having dyslexia. So that makes me think right away that probably one of the kids
Hmm.
has this kind of problem, but rather than going out and talking to the child about the child themselves, they talk about somebody else. And it's kind of in the same way that like Wells took off his shoes to make the girl without a name, the main character, to make her feel more comfortable. Or, like, so
Hmm.
I feel like there's just a different, it's just the same thing, but handled a little differently, which is
hmm
interesting.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah,
and
very much so.
also with your passage, Anna Marie, I really liked how she confided the secret about the chocolate chip pancakes because I'm thinking to myself, I've never made chocolate chip pancakes and I will definitely burn those chocolate chips. But now Graham taught me that a little something and confide into those kids, which is me, the reader.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah, yeah, it's
um,
fun. It really
Mhm.
is. Yeah, yeah, it's just it's a lot of fun to get when you sit down and you write something and your characters, like I said, start to come alive for you,
hmm hmm
and you start to watch them enjoying their lives or doing what they're doing. So yeah, as a writer, that's fun. And not to get on the counseling side here, but for everyone that's listening that isn't necessarily writing a book, having a journal is like so important. Oh my goodness, it's like one of the best gifts that we can give ourselves as individuals, just to take a journal and take something that happens to us on any given day and just put it down into words. Because what happens when we do that is all of a sudden a different part of us suddenly starts to come through. And you can watch your hand writing, but you see different words coming out than you would have thought of. And just the magic of all of that that begins to happen. Yeah,
Yeah, and
it's
also if you have an issue, I feel like recently I had an issue that I just couldn't wrap my head around. And then I wrote in my journal, and it was like as I was writing, I started to see the answer to
mhm,
the issue. Like, oh, this is what I need to do. And I'm like, I'm so glad that I wrote this out in my journal because I don't think I would have come up with it just because when life is, we've talked about this before, when life is just throwing so much at you, you're focused so much outside, and journaling is a
mhm,
way of focusing inside. So,
mhm. Yeah, very much so. Yeah, very much so. I think one of my favorite, I don't think, I know one of my favorite books is A Woman of Independent Means.
mm,
There's just a lapse in memory there. Yeah, A Woman of Independent Means. And the entire book is written in letter form. And
Mm.
so it's very powerful the way she, talks about her life and she chronicles her life as she's going on. So it's just one of my favorite books, just to watch that gradual blooming of herself, because her husband dies and she's left with the company and, so she has to take over and everything. And it's beautifully written.
There's definitely
And
a personal aspect to a letter written book
mm-hmm.
because that's like
mhm,
definitely like you feel like the author is just confiding
mhm.
directly, really in a more direct way than like a
Absolutely.
novel per se.
Right, absolutely. And I was going to say, even the book Meditations that Marcus Aurelius, wrote, he journaled every day. And he just journaled about the things. I mean, he was an emperor, so he journaled about things that were happening and the different personalities that would come to him. I mean, he was a man of authority and leadership. But when you sit and read the journal, you see the real person who sat and you saw what the mind was thinking while these things were happening. He had to keep a certain persona, so of course that's under Stoics and things like that. But the Meditations is an excellent, excellent book to sit and read. I mean, it's beautiful. Yeah, so it's just two different forms, and then just putting in Anne Frank,
Mm.
how she kept her diary and journal, diary slash journal, and what we get to see that we never would have seen had she not taken the time. And beautifully, as I think we've already said, is that when you do write that way, you are confiding to that inner wisdom of yourself.
Yeah.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
I don't think Marcus Aurelius thought that tons of years later, there would be people that would be reading his wisdom, nor did
Right.
Anne Frank, I don't think, thought about that either. So,
Right.
mhm,
Right. Yeah.
yeah.
It's
So that
amazing.
thrills me thinking that the books that we are writing, someone might sit and just connect with that in a very special, special way.
Yeah, and I love that
Yeah.
we're doing this because when when you read a book, you don't often get the author's perspective on some of these things. And
Mhm,
you get your interpretation of it, and everybody has their own interpretation, and they can misinterpret certain things and say, oh,
mhm,
it's this, or this person's doing this. But it's nice to hear authors talk about it
mhm. Yeah, very much so.
come from their mouths.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Thank you all for joining us today. Please share your stories with us. We love when you share your stories, and we love reading them and hearing them. And we will see you for our next episode on the Bookweaver's Quill.